You might have heard of 4 types of interpretation of Scripture. And these come from the Jewish tradition. We find them in the Church Fathers. And so there's this rich way of looking at Scripture and trying to find different ways of interpreting them. Because some passages cause problems when you're just looking at them literally, as if it was a history book. It just doesn't work. It can't be literal. So we try to find other ways of interpreting the Bible, and there's a long tradition for this. There are 4 types of interpretation, and these are some of the expressions I know of. You might find other expressions somewhere else. First one is literal. So we read it like a history book. This is what happened. The second one is allegorical. So usually in the Bible, the way this works is that a text in the New Testament is an allegory to a story that happened in the Old Testament. Or the Old Testament was written through so many centuries that sometimes a story from the Old Testament is a reflection of what happened earlier there. So that's a way to interpret. But there's actually another way to talk about allegorical. I'll come back to that. Moral. So basically we're getting moral teachings from the Bible, and that's how we would interpret them. And finally, mystical. So what is it telling us about this invisible world beyond us? What is it telling us about our own soul? What is it saying about God? And it just so happens that the different texts in the Bible will be interpreted differently to get an ecological message out of it. I'll give you one example of each. The first one, the literal interpretation, and I get this from Luke 5, the miraculous catch of fish. Okay, when I read this one, I read it literally. So what happens? The 4 first disciples who were fishermen. So Jesus comes to the shore, and before I tell the story, we have to understand that the way fishermen fished in the Sea of Galilee is that they would fish during the night, and then they would come back to shore, and then sell their fish on the marketplace. Apparently, the type they fished, which was really popular, were sardines. We even have archaeological finds about that, showing that that was very popular, and they would be salted or prepared in certain ways and then sold even farther. So that's what they catched, and in large abundance usually. So they caught those at night. So Peter comes. His name is Simon at that part. We'll call him Simon Peter. Comes, and Jesus tells him, "Well, let's go back. Let's go." And then Peter says, "No way. We fished, all night and we didn't catch anything." And Jesus says, "Let's go in the deep water. Let's go try again." So they leave. So now they're not fishing at night. They're fishing during the day. And then cast their nets and take out so many fish they need 2 boats to take them. What's happening? Well, here's my interpretation by suggesting that this story really happened and that it would be historical. So here's my literal interpretation. So instead of catching sardines, which are a nocturnal fish, and were perhaps overfished, well then they were now fishing a diurnal fish, a fish during the day, and they caught tilapia probably, and those were less caught. So since most of the fishermen were concentrating on those fish at night, the sardines, well now they were concentrating on another one and throwing their nets. and then they catch so many. It's kind of interesting because still today, when people go visit the Holy Land, well, people are invited to eat St. Peter's fish, which is tilapia, which is fished during the day. So there you go. This is reading the Bible in a very literal sense and then finding some ecological explanations to it. And it is still miraculous because we went from no fishes to changing some habits and then feeding people, thanks to that. Allegorical. Okay, so in John chapter 9, we have the healing of a blind man. Okay, at the last paragraph on this page here, you'll see there's an intra-biblical allegory as Jesus' gesture recalls how God shapes Adam from the ground in Genesis 2. How does Jesus heal the blind man? By spitting on the ground, taking that mud and putting it on the eyes. Well, Jesus is kind of acting like God does in Genesis 2 when he shapes Adam from the soil. Okay? There's an allegory there. And that's usually how we talk about allegories. But when I started working in the church, many people around me inspired me, saying that the Bible needs to be actualized. We need to see that these stories, what would they sound like today? What is it teaching us about how we act today? And there's a structure in the story that enlightens us to act in a certain way. And so here we go. This story becomes an allegory of actualization of environmental awareness. Okay, so the blind man resembles each of us who cannot see the consequences of our daily actions on the environment. Okay, we pour something down the drain, we don't know what's going to happen down that drain. We put lots of toxic chemicals in the trash can. Well, that goes to a landfill and we don't see what's happening there. We decide to go on trips 4 or 5 times a year, spewing lots of CO2 in the air because of the planes. We don't see the consequences on the rising sea levels and the ice melting. So we're blind to all of these things. That's the first step. The second step, Jesus acts like any caring person who wants to help others to see. Raising awareness. I want to help you to see. Does Jesus accuse that person of the person's sins? No. Jesus is non-judgmental, and he brings the reality of the earth to the person's eyes. Just, what's our earthly condition? What is happening? And bringing earth closer to the eyes, bringing reality closer to the eyes, seeing stuff closer. So this is a great allegory. I just love this story. And so I'm just making this parallel between the number of times that I've helped people to see raising their environmental awareness and how Jesus helps this blind man to see, and there are so many beautiful parallels. Okay, let's continue. Moral interpretation of the Bible. This is actually, I think, the most powerful one, because this is when we officially show that the Bible really teaches people how to take care of the environment, or mostly our connection, our relation to the environment. And so people back then, when the Bible was written, needed to hear this, and people today still need to hear this. We are much closer to the inspiration that brought the person to write those verses in the Bible. So what was God telling those people then? What is God telling us now? This is a moral directive. And in Genesis 2, God tells the first human to till and to keep the garden. So in the story, God places Adam in the garden to cultivate it and guard it. This challenge can be applied to us for the sustainable development of our environment. And let's go to the fourth type of interpretation. It's the mystical one. It shows us, like, it lifts a veil to help us try to understand what's happening in with God and with the spiritual side of things, really. In Romans 8, Paul gets inspired to tell us that the creation groans in the pains of childbirth. And so Paul reveals in his letter to the Romans that the environment is not an inanimate object, but a suffering subject. And the text is hopeful because it points to a better world when humanity has evolved, when humanity has opened its eyes, when humanity starts acting like children of God. So these are four beautiful ways of interpreting the Bible, and you will see them as I present the different references in the Bible as we go along. And we have lots to discover in front of us.